The day my hearing returned, I learned my daughter had already scheduled my incompetence evaluation. At 73, I thought the worst thing cancer could take from me was my hearing. I was wrong. The worst thing it could take was my ability to hear what my family was planning behind my back. I'm Dr. George Wellington. For 40 years, I saved lives as a cardiac surgeon. But I couldn't save myself from the one person I trusted most, my own daughter. Emily had been the perfect caregiver since my hearing loss 18 months ago. She moved me into her house, organized my medications, drove me to appointments. I was grateful enough to never question why she suddenly needed power of attorney over my $4.8 million estate. Then one morning, sound crashed back into my world like a flatline suddenly jumping to life. That's when I heard Emily on the phone coaching a doctor about my symptoms. Symptoms I'd never had. A cognitive decline that existed only in her fabricated medical files. She needed me declared mentally incompetent, and she needed it done fast. You see, in chess, the most dangerous piece isn't the queen. It's the pawn that reaches the other side. I'd been playing the helpless pawn, but Emily was about to discover what happens when that pawn transforms. This story has more devastating reversals than anything I witnessed in 40 years of emergency surgery. Each twist will hit you like a defibrillator shock to the heart. And if you think you know how family betrayal works, you're about to learn something that will change how you see every elderly person in your life. Hit subscribe now, because by the end, you'll want to call your parents. And drop your state below. Trust me, location matters when someone decides you're too senile to control your own money. The nightmare began at exactly 6:23 a.m. on June 15th, when I heard my daughter destroying me one phone call at a time. The return of sound should have been cause for celebration. Instead, it became my introduction to betrayal. I'd been living with Emily and her husband David for 8 months. My daughter insisted after my diagnosis. Couldn't bear the thought of me alone in the Guilford mansion where her mother Margaret and I had spent 37 years building our life together. Emily Wellington Morris, 46 years old, senior partner at Brennan & Associates downtown Baltimore, my pride and joy since the day she graduated summa cum laude from University of Maryland Law School. The house felt like a museum of my former independence. Emily had converted the guest room into what she called Dad's space, complete with large button phone, magnifying glass for reading, and medical alert bracelet I'd refused to wear. She'd reorganized my medications, labeled everything in bold print, and created a daily schedule that treated me like a mildly confused resident at an assisted living facility. I'd played along because the alternative, admitting that my brilliant, successful daughter was infantilizing me, seemed paranoid. The Wellington Family Trust I'd established in 2019, during my first cancer scare, held everything. The Guilford mansion assessed at $1.4 million. My diversified investment portfolio worth $2.8 million, and the $600,000 proceeds from selling my cardiology practice to Dr. Reginald Foster. Total estate value, $4.8 million, all designated for Emily's inheritance upon my death, or in the event I became legally incapacitated and unable to manage my affairs. That incapacitation clause had seemed like prudent planning 3 years ago. This morning it felt like a loaded gun pointed at my head. I shuffled downstairs, maintaining the routine Emily expected. Slow, careful steps. Confused expression when she spoke without facing me directly. Hand cupped to ear when the television volume wasn't loud enough. The careful performance of a man whose world had gone silent and who depended entirely on visual cues and lip reading to navigate basic conversations. "Morning, Dad," Emily said, exaggerating her lip movements the way she'd learned in the family therapy sessions her company's healthcare plan had covered. I nodded and pointed to my ear with the helpless gesture that had become my signature communication, shaking my head sadly. But I heard every word, every inflection, every pause that suggested she was choosing her words carefully. Emily was on her phone in the kitchen, back turned to me, voice deliberately lowered. For months, she'd been having these conversations when she thought I couldn't hear. I'd assumed they were work calls, complex legal cases, client consultations, the kind of professional discussions that required privacy. I'd been wrong about that too. "Dr. Reeves, this is Emily Morris. We discussed my father's condition last week when I brought him in for the preliminary consultation." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. Dr. Patricia Reeves was a neuropsychologist. I'd never met her. Yes, the cognitive decline has accelerated significantly since our last conversation. He's showing classic early-stage dementia symptoms: confusion about time and place, repetitive questions, difficulty managing basic financial decisions. Cognitive decline. I'd been sharper than ever, using my supposed deafness to observe family dynamics, to notice details I'd missed when I was actively participating in conversations. The forced silence had made me more perceptive, not less. Dr. Reeves, I need you to understand the urgency of this situation. My father built a substantial estate through decades of medical practice. If something happens to him without proper legal protections in place, his assets could be vulnerable to exploitation by unscrupulous individuals who target elderly people with diminished capacity. She was talking about cognitive testing. The next morning, Emily left for work at her usual time, 7:30 a.m. sharp, travel mug in hand, already on her phone with the first client crisis of the day. David had left even earlier for what he called client meetings, but which seemed to happen with increasing frequency and mounting stress. I had the house to myself and a choice to make. I could confront Emily directly, march into her law office, demand explanations, play the hurt and betrayed father card with righteous indignation, or I could continue playing chess. 24 years as chief of cardiology had taught me that the most successful surgery happens when the patient never knows how close they came to dying on the table. The surgeon's job is to remain calm, gather information, and make precise decisions based on complete data. I chose to keep gathering data. That afternoon at 3:47 p.m., Emily made another call from her study. I positioned myself in the hallway outside her door, silent as the ghost she believed me to be. The conversation that followed would change the trajectory of my remaining years. Patricia, I need you to understand something about my father's evaluation that goes beyond standard neuropsychological testing, Emily said, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she used in court depositions. A pause while Dr. Reeves responded. I'm not asking you to manufacture findings that don't exist, but my father is a proud, accomplished man who spent 4 decades saving lives. He's highly intelligent and very good at compensating for cognitive deficits. A standard MMSE might not capture the subtle changes I've been observing at home. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear Emily's breathing, controlled but stressed. Dr. Reeves, let me be more specific about what I've documented. 3 weeks ago, my father tried to write a check for grocery delivery and couldn't remember our address. Last Tuesday, he asked me the same question about his medication schedule 4 times within an hour. Yesterday morning, I found him standing in the kitchen at 3 a.m. fully dressed, claiming he was late for surgery. None of these incidents had happened. I'd been documenting my own behavior meticulously since moving in with Emily, partly out of medical habit and partly because I'd sensed something was wrong with how she perceived my capabilities. Patricia, I need the July 8th evaluation to reflect the reality of my father's condition, not just his ability to perform well on cognitive tests during a single assessment session. The trust documents are very specific about mental competency requirements for asset management. My blood pressure spiked. Emily wasn't just questioning my mental state. She was building a medical case against it. I understand your professional obligations, but you need to understand my family obligations. If my father retains legal control of his finances while experiencing cognitive decline, he could lose everything to scammers, predatory financial advisors, or his own poor judgment. The competency clause in his trust isn't about taking away his autonomy. It's about protecting the legacy he built for our family. Legacy, as if I were already dead. Dr. Reeves, I'll send you additional documentation of his symptoms before the evaluation. Medical records, incident reports, behavioral observations from the past 6 months. This isn't about one afternoon of testing. It's about a pattern of decline that requires immediate intervention. The line went quiet, except for Emily's breathing and the sound of her fingers drumming against her desk. A nervous habit from childhood that intensified when she was lying. The trust allows for immediate transfer of asset management authority if he's declared mentally incompetent by qualified medical professionals. It's a safety measure my father insisted on when he was thinking clearly, back when he understood the risks of cognitive decline in elderly patients. Safety measure, protection, intervention. Emily had weaponized the language of medical care to justify what sounded increasingly like financial manipulation. Patricia, we're not stealing from him. We're protecting him from the consequences of decisions he's no longer equipped to make. The evaluation on July 8th needs to reflect that reality. Emily ended the call and immediately dialed another number. David, it's done. Dr. Reeves will evaluate Dad next Tuesday. If her assessment supports what we've documented, the trust provisions kick in automatically. That's when the final piece clicked into place like a diagnosis suddenly making perfect, terrible sense. Moderate to severe cognitive decline. Over the next 3 days, I became a detective in my own home. While Emily thought I was taking afternoon naps or staring blankly at daytime television, I was conducting systematic reconnaissance of my daughter's activities. Emily's study became my primary target. She kept it locked when she wasn't home, a new habit that had started around the time I moved in. But I'd helped install those deadbolt locks 20 years ago when she was studying for the bar exam and needed absolute quiet for concentration. The spare key was still taped under her desk drawer, exactly where we'd hidden it in case of emergencies. Inside her locked study, I found a manila folder labeled Dad, Medical Documentation, that contained documents I'd never seen and medical assessments I'd never participated in. The first document was an incident report dated 3 months ago describing an episode where I allegedly became lost walking to the neighborhood pharmacy and was found by a concerned neighbor sitting on a bench, confused about my location. I'd never been lost. I'd never sat on that bench. I'd never had any interaction with our neighbors about confusion or disorientation. The second document was a cognitive assessment summary from Dr. Helen Morrison, a geriatrician I'd supposedly visited 6 weeks ago. According to this assessment, I demonstrated significant decline in executive function, short-term memory deficits consistent with early-stage dementia, and decreased spatial awareness indicating progressive neurological deterioration. I'd never met Dr. Helen Morrison. The third document was a series of family observation reports detailing my daily behavior over the past 4 months. According to Emily's documentation, I exhibited repetitive questioning, difficulty managing personal hygiene, confusion about meal times, and inappropriate social responses during family conversations. All fiction. All bearing my forged signature on consent forms I'd never seen. But the most damning document was a draft petition to Baltimore Circuit Court, case hash CV 2024-12851. Petition for determination of mental incompetence and appointment of guardian, George Wellington, Ward. Emily had already prepared comprehensive legal groundwork. She'd created a fictional medical history, documented cognitive decline that existed only on paper, and scheduled the evaluation designed to rubber stamp a predetermined conclusion. The petition was thorough, professionally formatted, and completely fraudulent. It painted a picture of a once competent physician who had deteriorated rapidly following cancer treatment and hearing loss, now requiring legal intervention to protect him from financial exploitation and poor decision-making. Reading my own obituary while still breathing was a uniquely disturbing experience. I photographed every page with my smartphone, hands steadier than they'd been in months. 40 years of surgery had taught me that the most complex operations required the calmest hands and the clearest thinking under pressure. That evening, I made a decision that felt like stepping back into an operating room after retirement. I called my old colleague Jonathan Pierce, who specialized in elder law after 3 decades representing families in crisis. "George, what a pleasant surprise," Jonathan said when I reached his direct line. "How are you managing things since the hearing loss? Emily mentioned you've been staying with her family." "Jonathan, my hearing returned 3 days ago," I said without preamble. "Emily doesn't know yet, and I need legal advice about something that's going to sound impossible." A pause. "George, you sound different, sharper. What's going on?" "I think my daughter is systematically building a fraudulent case to have me declared mentally incompetent, so she can access my trust fund. I have documentary evidence, and I need to know whether what I've discovered constitutes criminal fraud." Silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. "Jesus Christ, George. Email me everything you found. I'll review it tonight and call you first thing tomorrow morning." "Jonathan, there's something else. I think Emily's motivation isn't greed, it's desperation, and that might make her more dangerous, not less." The next morning at exactly 7:15 a.m., Jonathan's call woke me from the first solid sleep I'd had in weeks. George, we need to meet face to face. Today. What your daughter has planned isn't just unethical. It's a felony. My daughter had already hired 3 expert witnesses. Jonathan Pierce's law office occupied the entire 32nd floor of the Transamerica Tower in downtown Baltimore, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the inner harbor. I'd been here before for estate planning consultations, but never as someone whose daughter was planning to destroy his legal autonomy. George, what your daughter is orchestrating isn't just elder abuse. It's conspiracy, fraud, and potentially racketeering if she's coordinating with multiple medical professionals, Jonathan said, spreading Emily's forged documents across his mahogany conference table like evidence in a criminal trial. But why? I asked, though I'd spent 3 sleepless nights developing theories. Emily makes $180,000 a year as a senior partner. David runs his own CPA practice. They live in a $400,000 house with manageable mortgage payments. What could drive my daughter to risk her career and her freedom for money she'll inherit eventually anyway? Jonathan's expression told me he'd already investigated that question. George, I made some calls after we spoke yesterday. Discreet inquiries through colleagues who handle federal criminal defense. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Did you know David is under federal investigation by the FBI? The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the building had shifted on its foundation. Federal investigation for what? Tax evasion. 18 months of alleged systematic underreporting on his CPA practice. We're talking about $2.3 million in back taxes, penalties, and potential criminal fines. If convicted, David faces 8 years in federal prison. Everything suddenly made horrible sense, like a cardiac arrhythmia finally showing its pattern on the monitor. Emily isn't greedy, George. She's desperate. Her husband is looking at financial ruin in prison time, and she needs exactly $2.3 million to negotiate a settlement with the federal prosecutors, which is almost exactly half my trust fund value. $2.3 million in penalties and back taxes, George. Your estate is worth $4.8 million. Emily has calculated this down to the dollar. I sat in Jonathan's office, watching Baltimore's harbor traffic through windows that cost more than most people's cars, and felt the peculiar clarity that comes with complete diagnostic understanding. Emily hadn't fallen to simple greed. She'd fallen to the most dangerous motivation of all, desperation mixed with intellectual justification. Jonathan, what are my legal options? Legally, you could walk into the FBI field office this afternoon and file federal elder abuse charges. Emily would be arrested within 24 hours. The Maryland Attorney Grievance Commission would suspend her law license pending investigation. She'd lose her career, probably face 3 to 5 years in prison. And personally, Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with the expression of someone who'd spent decades navigating family crises that destroyed lives. George, Emily has scheduled your competency evaluation for July 8th. That's 5 days from now. If Dr. Reeves finds you mentally incompetent, Emily becomes your legal guardian immediately under the trust provisions. She'll have complete authority over your finances, medical decisions, living arrangements, everything. You'll essentially cease to exist as an autonomous adult. And if I simply don't show up for the evaluation, she can petition for an emergency competency hearing based on the medical evidence she's fabricated. With 3 expert witnesses and documented behavioral incidents, a Baltimore Circuit Court judge might grant temporary guardianship pending a full psychiatric evaluation. I understood the tactical situation Emily had created. Checkmate in 3 moves unless I fundamentally changed the nature of the game we were playing. Jonathan, I need you to research Maryland's single-party consent laws for audio recording. Specifically, whether conversations recorded in my daughter's house would be admissible in court proceedings. George, what exactly are you planning? I'm planning to stop playing defense and start playing offense. That afternoon, I made 2 strategic moves. First, I drove to Best Buy and purchased a high-quality digital audio recorder, explaining to the helpful young salesperson that I wanted to record audiobooks for my grandchildren. Second, I visited my audiologist, Dr. Michael Torres, for a comprehensive hearing evaluation. Perfect hearing, completely restored, documented, dated, medically certified, and signed. Emily came home that evening visibly stressed, checking her phone every few minutes with the kind of nervous energy that suggested mounting pressure from external sources. David had missed dinner again, Another client emergency that was probably a meeting with federal criminal defense attorneys. I watched her at the kitchen table reviewing legal briefs with the intense focus that had made her successful in complex litigation cases. She looked thinner than she'd been 6 months ago, with the kind of weight loss that comes from chronic stress rather than intentional dieting. For a moment, observing my daughter's obvious suffering, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the forged medical records describing my non-existent dementia. Emily needs exactly what I'm worth, and she's willing to destroy me to get it. The next morning brought the first crack in Emily's carefully constructed plan. I was in the living room at 9:15 a.m., pretending to read a large print mystery novel while Emily paced the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. "What do you mean Dr. Reeves has withdrawn from the case?" Emily's voice pitched higher with each word, carrying the controlled panic of an attorney whose star witness had just recanted testimony on the courthouse steps. I couldn't hear Dr. Reeves's response, but Emily's face told the story of a professional relationship disintegrating in real time. "Patricia, we discussed this arrangement extensively. The evaluation is scheduled for July 8th. I've already prepared the documentation packet you requested, and my father is expecting—" She stopped mid-sentence, listening to whatever Dr. Reeves was explaining. "An ethics complaint? Filed by whom? Patricia, if this is about the consultation fee we discussed, I can adjust the payment structure to address any concerns about—" Another pause, this one longer and more ominous. "I see. And you can't recommend another neuropsychologist because your professional liability insurance won't cover referrals in cases where ethics complaints have been filed?" "Yes, I understand your position." The conversation ended with Emily slamming her phone onto the granite counter hard enough to crack the protective case. For 20 minutes, she stood in the kitchen staring out the window at nothing, occasionally muttering words I couldn't quite catch. Then she was back on her phone, making the kinds of calls that desperate people make when their primary plan collapses. "Dr. Matthews, this is Emily Morris, attorney with Brennan and Associates. I need an emergency neuropsychological evaluation for my father." The original doctor had to withdraw due to an unexpected scheduling conflict. Dr. Matthews was apparently more accommodating than Dr. Reeves, or perhaps less concerned about professional ethics when substantial fees were involved. July 9th at 2 p.m. works perfectly for our schedule. Dr. Matthews, I should mention that my father has been exhibiting increasingly concerning symptoms over the past several months. Significant memory loss, confusion about familiar environments, difficulty with basic decision-making tasks. Emily was repeating the same script she'd used with Dr. Reeves, but with more urgency and less finesse. "I'll email you his complete medical history before the appointment, including incident reports and cognitive assessment summaries from his primary care physician. Dr. Matthews, I want to emphasize that this evaluation is crucial for my father's safety and financial protection." After Emily left for work at her usual time, I made the call that would either save my autonomy or destroy my relationship with my daughter permanently. Jonathan, the original neuropsychologist, backed out. Emily's found a replacement, Dr. Matthews. Evaluation scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. "George, there's something else you need to know about Dr. Patricia Reeves." Jonathan's voice carried the satisfaction of an attorney who'd uncovered crucial information. She didn't just withdraw from Emily's case. She filed a formal complaint with the Maryland Board of Professional Responsibility. Against Emily? Against Emily, specifically citing professional misconduct related to requests for falsified medical evaluations. George, Patricia recorded their conversations. She's been cooperating with a Bar Association ethics investigation for the past 2 weeks. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with growing concern. Emily's original plan was crumbling, but that made her more dangerous, not less dangerous. Desperate people made increasingly risky decisions. "Jonathan, I need you to prepare 3 documents immediately. First, a formal revocation of Emily's power of attorney designation, removing her as my designated financial agent. Second, a comprehensive complaint against Emily with the Maryland Attorney Grievance Commission, detailing everything we've discovered. Third, a new will that restructures my estate to prevent any future manipulation attempts. George, are you absolutely certain about this course of action? Once we file these documents, there's no going back to a normal family relationship. Jonathan, there hasn't been a normal family relationship since Emily decided to destroy my mental competence for money. I'm just making that official. That afternoon, I positioned my digital recorder in Emily's study and settled in for what I knew would be the most important surveillance operation of my life. At exactly 4:30 p.m., Emily made the call I'd been anticipating. Dr. Matthews, I wanted to follow up on tomorrow's evaluation and provide some additional context about my father's condition that might be helpful for your assessment. I pressed the record button and listened to my daughter systematically coach a medical professional to find me mentally incompetent. Dr. Matthews, my father was a prominent cardiac surgeon before his retirement. He's extremely intelligent, professionally accomplished, and very good at masking cognitive deficits during formal evaluations. He may appear completely lucid during your standard assessment protocol. Emily was teaching Dr. Matthews how to see through my competence to find the incompetence she needed him to document. I need you to look specifically for subtle indicators that might not show up in basic cognitive testing. Problems with abstract reasoning, difficulty with complex financial decision-making, inability to understand long-term consequences of major choices. She paused, and I could hear papers rustling as she consulted her notes. The trust fund language is very specific, Dr. Matthews. We need clinical documentation of moderate to severe cognitive decline, rendering the patient unable to manage financial affairs independently. That exact language triggers the competency provisions that protect my father's assets. Protect. The word tasted like poison. Dr. Matthews, I want to be completely transparent with you about the stakes involved. My father controls a substantial estate. If he retains legal authority over those assets while experiencing cognitive decline, he could lose everything to financial predators who target elderly people with diminished capacity. Emily ended the call and immediately dialed another number. David, it's me. Dr. Matthews will evaluate Dad tomorrow at 2 p.m. If everything proceeds according to plan, we'll have legal access to the trust fund by the end of next week. A pause while David responded. David, I know this feels morally complicated, but we're out of options. The FBI is moving forward with your prosecution whether we like it or not. This is our only chance to save our family from complete financial destruction. That's when I realized Emily wasn't the only family member lying to me. At exactly 7 a.m. on July 9th, Emily knocked gently on my bedroom door with the kind of careful consideration reserved for handling fragile elderly relatives. Dad, we need to leave for your doctor's appointment in 1 hour. Remember? Dr. Matthews is going to do some memory tests to make sure everything's working properly upstairs. I opened the door, maintaining the confused, slightly disoriented expression Emily expected to see. Appointment? What kind of appointment? Nobody told me about any appointment. We discussed this yesterday, Dad, and the day before. Dr. Matthews specializes in helping older adults who've been experiencing some confusion or forgetfulness. Confusion. Forgetfulness. The clinical euphemisms for the mental incompetence Emily needed a doctor to confirm. I don't remember agreeing to see any Dr. Matthews, I said, adding just enough querulous uncertainty to sell the performance. That's exactly why we need to see him, Dad, just to make sure everything's okay. During the 20-minute drive to Dr. Matthews' office in Towson, Emily provided what she probably thought was reassuring preparation, but was actually coaching for a fraudulent medical evaluation. Dad, when Dr. Matthews asks you questions today, don't try to seem sharper than you feel. There's no shame in admitting when things are difficult to remember or understand. We just want to make sure you're getting the right kind of help. I nodded obediently, playing the role of a confused, elderly man who needed his daughter's guidance to navigate basic medical care. And Dad, if you feel overwhelmed or frustrated during the testing, just tell Dr. Matthews. He understands that cognitive evaluations can be stressful for people who are experiencing memory problems. Memory problems I didn't have. Cognitive difficulties that existed only in Emily's fabricated documentation. Dr. Matthews' office occupied the entire 15th floor of a medical building designed to intimidate through sterile professionalism. Everything from the marble lobby to the leather furniture in the waiting room screamed legitimacy, which made Emily's fraud more disturbing rather than less. Dr. Matthews himself was younger than I'd expected. Early 40s, carefully groomed beard. The kind of clinical psychologist who specialized in high-paying evaluations for families with substantial assets at stake. Dr. Wellington, I'm Dr. Matthews. I'll be conducting your cognitive evaluation today. Your daughter has provided some background about her concerns regarding changes in your mental state. Emily positioned herself in a chair directly beside his desk, legal pad ready, pen poised, as if she were taking minutes for a corporate board meeting rather than witnessing her father's psychological assassination. Dr. Matthews, before we begin the formal assessment, I want to reiterate my observations about my father's condition over the past several months, Emily said, consulting her notes with practiced efficiency. His decline has been gradual but unmistakable. Short-term memory lapses, confusion about familiar places and people, increasing difficulty managing basic financial decisions like paying bills or understanding banking statements. Dr. Matthews nodded professionally, making notes in a file that already contained Emily's fabricated medical documentation. And when did you first notice these cognitive changes, Miss Morris? Approximately 8 months ago, shortly after he moved in with our family following his hearing loss from cancer treatment. Initially, we attributed the confusion to adjusting to his new living situation, but the symptoms have progressively worsened. Symptoms that existed only in Emily's imagination and forged medical reports. For the next 90 minutes, Dr. Matthews subjected me to the most comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation I'd experienced since my medical school training. Mini mental state examination testing basic cognitive function, clock drawing exercises assessing visuospatial processing, word list recall measuring short-term memory capacity, abstract reasoning problems evaluating executive function. I answered every question correctly, drew perfect clocks, recalled word lists flawlessly, solved abstract problems with the kind of systematic thinking that 40 years of cardiac surgery had trained into my neural pathways. Emily's face grew increasingly tense as the evaluation progressed, her carefully planned script colliding with the reality of my intact cognitive function. Dr. Wellington, you're performing exceptionally well on these standardized assessments, Dr. Matthews said after completing the formal testing protocol. Your cognitive function appears not just normal but superior for your age demographic. Doctor, Emily interrupted with barely controlled desperation, these formal tests might not capture the subtle deficits I've been documenting at home. Perhaps we need more sophisticated evaluation protocols that assess real-world decision-making capacity rather than abstract test performance. Miss Morris, your father's performance today demonstrates intact memory, excellent abstract reasoning, and superior problem-solving abilities. I cannot diagnose cognitive impairment based on family observations when comprehensive clinical testing indicates normal function. Emily's carefully orchestrated plan was collapsing in real time, and I could see her calculating alternative strategies with the ruthless efficiency that made her an effective litigator. Dr. Matthews, could I speak with you privately for a moment? There are some family dynamics and medical history details that might be relevant to your assessment, but inappropriate to discuss in front of my father. They stepped into the hallway adjacent to his office. Through the partially open door, I could hear fragments of Emily's increasingly desperate attempt to salvage her fraudulent evaluation. Dr. Matthews, you need to understand that my father is highly intelligent and very capable of masking cognitive deficits during formal testing situations. This phenomenon is well documented in early-stage dementia cases involving educated professionals. When they returned 5 minutes later, Dr. Matthews looked uncomfortable but professionally resolute. Dr. Wellington, based on today's comprehensive evaluation, I'm going to recommend follow-up cognitive assessment in 6 months rather than any immediate interventions. At this time, I see no clinical evidence of cognitive impairment that would affect your ability to manage your personal or financial affairs independently. Emily's face went completely white as her last hope for a fraudulent incompetency finding evaporated. During the silent drive home, Emily's phone rang through the car's hands-free system. She answered without checking the caller ID, apparently forgetting that I could hear both sides of the conversation. David, the evaluation didn't go as planned. What do you mean it didn't go as planned? Emily, we talked about this. You said Dr. Matthews understood the situation. Dad performed normally on all the cognitive tests. Dr. Matthews won't support an incompetency finding based on today's assessment. Emily, the federal sentencing hearing is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. If I don't have the money for the plea agreement, I know exactly what the timeline is, David. I'm working on alternative approaches. Alternative approaches? Emily, you said having your father declared mentally incompetent was our only realistic option for accessing the trust fund before my sentencing. I'll find another neuropsychologist, someone more willing to consider family observations alongside formal test results. Emily, listen to yourself. You're talking about doctor shopping to find someone who will declare your father mentally incompetent despite evidence to the contrary. Do you understand what you're becoming? For a moment, neither of them spoke. I sat in the back seat of my daughter's car, a silent witness to the conversation that would determine whether I retained legal autonomy or became a victim of family financial desperation. David, I love my father, but I love you too. I can't watch federal prosecutors destroy our family when we have legal options available. Legal options, as if my mental competence was optional. Emily, what if we just told your father the truth about my situation? What if we asked for financial help instead of taking it through guardianship fraud? David, we've discussed this repeatedly. Dad would never understand the complexity of federal tax prosecution. He'd see it as personal failure, professional embarrassment. He'd probably cut us out of his will entirely rather than enable what he'd consider criminal behavior. So instead we're going to commit actual elder abuse? We're going to protect our family using legal mechanisms Dad established himself. The trust includes competency provisions specifically to prevent financial exploitation. We're not exploiting him. We're preventing others from exploiting him while addressing our own legitimate financial crisis. Legitimate financial crisis created by David's tax evasion. Financial exploitation disguised as protection. I have a call scheduled with Dr. Rebecca Stone tomorrow morning. She specializes in early-stage dementia evaluations for families dealing with financial protection issues. She scheduled my next fraudulent competency evaluation for the following afternoon. That evening, sitting alone in what Emily called Dad's room while she attended her regular yoga class, and David worked late on what were probably criminal defense consultations, I made the decision that would either save my autonomy or destroy my family permanently. I called FBI Special Agent Robert Hayes. Agent Hayes, this is Dr. George Wellington. I understand from my attorney Jonathan Pierce that you're investigating my son-in-law, David Morris, for federal tax evasion. Dr. Wellington, yes, sir. We've been meaning to contact you for a character reference regarding Mr. Morris. How can I assist you this evening? Agent Hayes, I believe I can assist your investigation in ways you haven't anticipated. I have evidence that my daughter Emily Morris is committing federal elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud in order to obtain money for David's legal defense fund. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Sir, that's an extremely serious allegation. What kind of evidence are you referring to? Forged medical records documenting cognitive decline that never occurred. Fabricated incident reports describing dementia symptoms I've never exhibited. Recorded conversations detailing systematic fraud designed to have me declared mentally incompetent for financial gain. Dr. Wellington, we'd like to interview you about these allegations. Are you available for a meeting this evening? Agent Hayes, I'm available right now. Special Agent Robert Hayes arrived at Emily's house 90 minutes later with his partner, Special Agent Sarah Mitchell. Emily was still at yoga, David was still at his evening client meetings, and I had approximately 2 hours to present evidence that would either vindicate my sanity or destroy my daughter's career. I played them Emily's recorded conversations with Dr. Matthews, detailing her instructions for finding incompetence despite clinical evidence of normal cognitive function. I showed them the forged medical records describing non-existent dementia symptoms. I walked them through Emily's systematic documentation of behavioral incidents that had never occurred. Dr. Wellington, your daughter's actions constitute federal elder abuse under 18 U.S.C. 1341 and 1343, Agent Hayes explained. Financial exploitation of elderly persons, especially involving amounts exceeding $100,000, carries penalties of up to 20 years imprisonment. Agent Hayes, what are my options for resolution that don't completely destroy my family? Sir, you can file a federal criminal complaint, which we'll investigate alongside David's tax case. You can pursue state-level prosecution through Baltimore County District Attorney's Office. Or you can attempt to resolve this through civil litigation and professional discipline. I thought about Emily in her evening yoga class, probably finding temporary peace through meditation and physical exercise, unaware that her father was providing federal agents with evidence of her criminal conspiracy. Agent Hayes, I want to give my daughter one final opportunity to choose ethical behavior over criminal behavior. Sir, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we allow Emily to complete her fraud attempt tomorrow afternoon with Dr. Rebecca Stone, but I want you present to witness the crime in progress and offer her a choice between prosecution and cooperation." Agent Mitchell leaned forward with interest. "Dr. Wellington, you're suggesting we let your daughter commit elder abuse fraud while federal agents document the crime. I'm suggesting we give Emily enough rope to hang herself, or enough reality to save herself." The next morning, I began preparing for what would either be my final performance as Emily's confused elderly father or the beginning of her journey toward federal prosecution. But first I called Jonathan Pierce with final instructions. "Jonathan, it's time to execute our contingency plan. File the power of attorney revocation immediately. Prepare the Maryland Attorney Grievance Commission complaint for submission tomorrow evening, and draft a new will that restructures my estate to prevent any future manipulation attempts. George, are you absolutely certain about proceeding with nuclear options? Once we file these documents, your relationship with Emily changes permanently." "Jonathan, my relationship with Emily changed permanently when she decided to forge medical records to steal my money. I'm just making that reality official." "What about Dr. Stone's evaluation this afternoon?" "Dr. Stone's evaluation will proceed exactly as Emily planned, but she's going to discover that some patients are more complicated than their medical histories suggest." At 1:30 p.m., Emily knocked on my door with the careful gentleness she used for all interactions with her supposedly declining father. "Dad, time to go see Dr. Stone. She's going to do some memory tests to help us understand what kind of care and support you might need going forward." Care and support. The euphemisms kept getting more elaborate. During the elevator ride to Dr. Stone's 14th floor office, Emily provided her usual coaching disguised as reassurance. "Dad, remember what we talked about. If Dr. Stone's questions seem confusing or overwhelming, just tell her honestly how you're feeling. Don't try to seem sharper than you really are." I nodded with the compliant confusion Emily expected, while federal agents positioned themselves strategically throughout the medical building. As we approached Dr. Stone's reception area, I activated my digital recorder and prepared to document my daughter's final attempt to destroy my legal competence for money. I started recording every conversation. Dr. Rebecca Stone's office occupied the prestigious corner suite of the Towson Medical Center, with panoramic views of Baltimore County that probably cost more per square foot than most people earned annually. Everything about the environment was designed to project clinical authority and professional legitimacy, which made Emily's fraudulent manipulation more morally offensive rather than less. Emily had prepared meticulously for this final assault on my cognitive competence. During the elevator ride to the 14th floor, she provided coaching that would have been obvious to anyone who wasn't supposed to be mentally impaired. "Dad, if Dr. Stone's questions seem difficult or confusing, don't struggle to find answers that aren't there. Just tell her honestly when things feel unclear or overwhelming." Unclear, overwhelming. Code words for the cognitive impairment Emily needed Dr. Stone to document. Dr. Stone herself was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-50s, expensively dressed, with the kind of clinical credentials that impressive families paid premium rates to obtain. She specialized in neuropsychological evaluations for elderly patients whose families had concerns about financial decision-making capacity. Perfect cover for guardianship fraud. "Dr. Wellington, I'll be conducting a comprehensive cognitive assessment today based on concerns your daughter has raised about changes in your mental state over the past several months," Dr. Stone said with professional warmth that masked the transactional nature of what was about to happen. Emily positioned herself in her customary chair beside the desk, legal pad ready, playing the concerned daughter role she'd perfected through months of rehearsal. "Dr. Stone, before we begin the formal evaluation, I want to provide additional context about my father's condition that might be relevant to your assessment," Emily said, consulting notes she'd prepared for this moment. "As I mentioned in our preliminary conversation, Dad's cognitive decline has been subtle but progressive. Memory lapses, confusion about familiar environments, increasing difficulty with complex decision-making tasks, particularly those involving financial management." Dr. Stone nodded professionally, making notes in a file that already contained Emily's fabricated medical history. "Miss Morris, have you documented specific incidents that illustrate these cognitive changes?" "Extensively. Just last week, Dad tried to write a check for grocery delivery but couldn't remember our street address. 3 days ago, he asked me the same question about his medication schedule multiple times within a single afternoon. Yesterday morning, I found him in the kitchen at 2 a.m., fully dressed, claiming he was late for surgery. Surgery he retired from 3 years ago. Incidents that existed only in Emily's criminal imagination. Dr. Stone, I want to emphasize that my father is exceptionally intelligent and spent decades masking medical symptoms from colleagues and patients. He may seem perfectly lucid during formal testing, but that's actually part of the disease process we're trying to address. Emily was systematically coaching Dr. Stone to ignore evidence of my competence in favor of her fabricated incompetence narrative. For 45 minutes, Dr. Stone administered the same neuropsychological battery I'd completed successfully the previous day. Memory tests, abstract reasoning problems, executive function assessments, visual-spatial processing evaluations. I answered every question correctly with the kind of systematic precision that decades of medical training had burned into my cognitive processes. Emily's expression grew increasingly desperate as my performance contradicted every element of her fraudulent medical history. Dr. Wellington, you're performing remarkably well on these cognitive assessments, Dr. Stone said, reviewing my test scores with obvious puzzlement. Your results suggest cognitive function that's not just normal but superior for your age group. Dr. Stone, Emily interrupted with barely controlled panic. Formal testing protocols might not capture the real-world deficits I've been observing in home environments. Perhaps we need to consider assessment methods that evaluate practical decision-making capacity rather than abstract problem-solving ability. Miss Morris, your father's cognitive performance today demonstrates intact memory, excellent reasoning skills, and superior problem-solving capacity. I cannot support a finding of mental incompetence based on family observations when comprehensive clinical testing indicates normal cognitive function. Emily's fraudulent evaluation was disintegrating, but she wasn't finished yet. Dr. Stone, could we discuss some additional family history and behavioral observations privately? There are sensitive medical details that might be inappropriate to address in front of my father, but could be crucial for accurate diagnosis. They stepped into the adjacent consultation room, leaving the door partially open. Emily's voice carried clearly as she made her final desperate attempt to complete the fraud. Dr. Stone, you need to understand that my father is exhibiting anosognosia, lack of insight into his own cognitive decline. This is common in early-stage dementia patients who maintain superficial social skills while losing practical decision-making capacity. When they returned, Dr. Stone looked professionally uncomfortable, but maintained her clinical composure. Dr. Wellington, based on today's comprehensive evaluation, I see no clinical evidence supporting a diagnosis of cognitive impairment or dementia. Your cognitive function appears normal for your age, and I cannot recommend any restrictions on your legal or financial autonomy. Emily's face went completely white as her final hope for fraudulent guardianship evaporated. That's when I decided to end 18 months of pretending to be the confused elderly man my daughter needed me to be. Dr. Stone, before you complete your written evaluation, I need to share something important with both of you, I said, abandoning the hesitant speaking pattern I'd maintained for months. Both women looked at me with surprise. Emily because of my sudden clarity. Dr. Stone because my speech pattern had completely changed. Dr. Stone, my hearing returned completely 3 weeks ago. My daughter doesn't know this yet. I've been documenting her activities, and I've discovered systematic fraud designed to have me declared mentally incompetent for financial gain. I pulled out my digital recorder and placed it on Dr. Stone's desk. Dr. Stone, I'm about to play you recorded conversations between my daughter and medical professionals. In these conversations, Emily provides specific instructions about what findings she needs in my psychological evaluation, regardless of actual test results. Dr. Wellington, I'm not sure this is... Doctor, before you write that evaluation report, you need to hear this. I pressed play. Emily's voice filled the room. The trust fund language is very specific, Dr. Matthews. We need clinical documentation of moderate to severe cognitive decline, rendering the patient unable to manage financial affairs independently. That exact language triggers the competency provisions that protect my father's assets. Dr. Stone's expression transformed from confusion to professional shock to moral outrage. Miss Morris, Did you attempt to coach Dr. Matthews to produce predetermined findings in your father's neuropsychological evaluation? Emily stood unsteadily, her carefully planned fraud exposed and her professional reputation destroyed in the span of 30 seconds. Dr. Stone, you don't understand the complete family situation. My father has been experiencing cognitive changes that formal testing might not detect. Emily, stop talking immediately, I said with the authoritative tone I'd used in cardiac surgery when complications required immediate intervention. I turned to Dr. Stone. Doctor, my daughter's husband is under federal investigation for tax evasion. They need $2.3 million for legal settlements. My trust fund contains $4.8 million. Emily has spent months creating fraudulent medical documentation to support guardianship proceedings that would give her access to my assets. The room went completely silent except for the air conditioning and Emily's increasingly rapid breathing. Dr. Stone, I've been recording my daughter's conversations for 6 weeks. I have documented evidence of elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted bribery of medical professionals. FBI agents are currently stationed in this building, waiting for my signal. Emily collapsed into her chair as if her skeleton had dissolved, the weight of complete exposure crushing her composure entirely. Dr. Stone, I need you to document everything that happened in this room today for potential criminal proceedings. My daughter will face federal charges, and your testimony about her attempt to manipulate your professional assessment will be crucial evidence. Emily looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, but the complete devastation of someone whose world had just collapsed around them. Dad, I was trying to save our family. Emily, you were destroying our family to save your husband from the consequences of his own criminal behavior. She has 24 hours to decide whether she wants justice or family reconciliation. That evening, Emily sat at my kitchen table across from FBI Special Agent Robert Hayes, Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, Jonathan Pierce, and me. The same kitchen where she'd made those devastating phone calls, now transformed into an improvised federal interrogation room. David was notably absent. His criminal defense attorney had advised complete separation from any conversations related to the elder abuse investigation until his own tax evasion case was resolved. Miss Morris, you're facing multiple federal charges. Agent Hayes began, consulting his notes with the methodical precision of someone who'd conducted hundreds of similar interviews. Elder abuse under 18 U.S.C. 1341, conspiracy to commit fraud under 18 U.S.C. 371, and financial exploitation of an elderly person under 18 U.S.C. 1343. Combined, these charges carry maximum penalties of 60 years imprisonment and permanent disbarment. Emily had aged a decade in the 6 hours since her fraud collapsed in Dr. Stone's office. Her professional composure, the confident demeanor that made her successful in high-stakes litigation, had been completely replaced by the raw vulnerability of someone whose entire world had disintegrated. Agent Hayes, I understand the severity of the charges against me, Emily said quietly, her voice barely audible. I also understand that my actions were criminally inexcusable, regardless of the personal circumstances that motivated them. I watched my daughter, the brilliant attorney I'd raised to value integrity above personal convenience, confront the full weight of what she'd chosen to become. Emily, I said, before Agent Hayes continues, I want to offer you 2 paths forward. This choice will determine the rest of your life. Agent Hayes raised an eyebrow. Federal prosecutors rarely appreciated defendants receiving multiple options during criminal investigations. Path 1. We proceed with full federal prosecution. You face trial, probable conviction based on the evidence I've provided, disbarment by the Maryland Attorney Grievance Commission, and 3 to 5 years in federal prison. David faces his tax evasion charges alone, without family support or financial resources. Emily nodded, tears beginning to streak her carefully applied makeup. Path 2. You accept responsibility, cooperate completely with federal investigations, and submit to consequences that address the harm you've caused without destroying your entire future. Dad, what does Path 2 actually involve? Complete honesty, Emily, about everything, starting right now. Agent Mitchell leaned forward with interest. Dr. Wellington, what specific cooperation are you proposing? Emily withdraws every fraudulent document she's filed, submits a comprehensive written confession to the Maryland Attorney Grievance Commission detailing her ethical violations, accepts whatever professional discipline they impose, and provides complete cooperation with David's criminal case, including testifying about any knowledge she has of his tax violations. Emily's face went pale. Dad, you're asking me to testify against David. I'm asking you to tell the truth about David's criminal behavior instead of committing additional crimes to cover it up. Jonathan Pierce consulted his legal notes. George, Path 2 also requires specific conditions for family relationship restoration. Emily, Path 2 requires that you and David immediately enter family therapy to address the ethical destruction that led to this crisis. You'll have no access to my finances for 2 years while you rebuild your professional integrity, and you'll commit to reconstructing our relationship based on absolute honesty rather than manipulation. Agent Hayes studied both of us carefully. Dr. Wellington, the federal government has legitimate prosecutorial interests in elder abuse cases. We can't simply ignore criminal behavior because families prefer private resolution. Agent Hayes, my daughter made catastrophic choices, but she made them from desperation rather than pure greed. The justice system should distinguish between predatory criminals and family members who've lost their moral compass under extreme pressure. Emily looked up at me for the first time since returning from Dr. Stone's office. Dad, why would you offer me any choice at all after everything I've done to you? Because 40 years as a surgeon taught me that the primary goal isn't punishment, it's healing, but healing requires accurately diagnosing the underlying pathology first. Emily took a shaky breath that sounded like someone drowning finally reaching the surface. I choose Path 2. Complete cooperation, full responsibility, whatever professional consequences the Bar Association imposes. Then here's exactly what happens next, I said, pulling out the legal documents Jonathan had prepared. You'll sign a comprehensive confession detailing every fraudulent action you've taken. You'll withdraw every fake medical document and legal petition you filed. You'll provide the FBI with complete information about David's tax situation, including any evidence of criminal behavior you've witnessed or suspected. And David? David faces the consequences of his own choices, Emily. Your marriage survives or fails based on honesty about his criminal behavior, not on your willingness to commit additional crimes to protect him. Agent Hayes gathered his materials. Dr. Wellington, we'll need formal statements from both of you for our case files. Miss Morris, your cooperation with our investigation will be documented in any future legal proceedings involving your husband's tax case. After the federal agents left, Emily and I remained at the kitchen table where this crisis had begun months earlier. Dad, how long have you been able to hear everything? 3 weeks, Emily. 21 days of listening to you plan my legal destruction. And you let me continue? You let me think I was succeeding? I let you choose your own actions, Emily. Every single day for 3 weeks you chose to continue the fraud. Today you chose to end it. She cried then, not the careful tears of legal strategy, but the deep, wrenching sobs of genuine remorse and complete emotional collapse. I don't know how to repair what I've destroyed. You start by accepting that some things can't be repaired, Emily. They can only be rebuilt using completely different materials. 3 months later, the Maryland Attorney Grievance Commission suspended Emily's law license for 18 months with mandatory ethics education and supervised practice upon reinstatement. David pleaded guilty to federal tax evasion charges and received 36 months in federal prison. Their marriage lasted exactly 4 weeks after his sentencing. Emily moved into a modest apartment 15 minutes from my house. We meet for dinner every Tuesday evening at the same restaurant, with the explicit understanding that trust is rebuilt through consistent ethical behavior over time, not through apologies or promises. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to enable their adult child's moral destruction, even when that refusal causes immediate pain. Sometimes love means letting them fall completely before helping them rebuild. 8 months later, I was teaching a medical ethics seminar at the University of Maryland School of Medicine when a third-year student asked the question that still keeps me awake some nights. Professor Wellington, what do you do when family loyalty conflicts directly with professional ethics? How do you choose between protecting people you love and upholding moral principles? I thought about Emily, about the choice between enabling and accountability, about the difference between love and complicity and moral destruction. You establish clear boundaries, I told the class. Love without ethical boundaries isn't love, it's codependency disguised as family devotion. and codependency enables the very behavior that ultimately destroys relationships. A student in the back row pressed the question further. But Professor Wellington, what if enforcing those ethical boundaries permanently damages your family relationships? What if holding people accountable means losing them entirely? Then the relationship was already destroyed by their unethical choices. You're just making that destruction visible instead of pretending it doesn't exist. After class, I drove to my weekly Tuesday dinner with Emily at Marconi's Italian restaurant in Little Italy, the same booth we'd occupied for 37 consecutive weeks since her professional life collapsed. Emily was already waiting, reviewing legal documents for the paralegal position she'd taken at a small personal injury firm downtown. Rebuilding a legal career from absolute disgrace required the kind of humility that law school never teaches, and most attorneys never learn. "How was your day?" I asked as we settled into our familiar routine. "Challenging but honest," Emily replied, closing her file folder. "The partners are reviewing my application for supervised law practice restoration next month. I've completed all required ethics education, and my bar monitoring supervisor submitted a positive evaluation. And how do you feel about potentially returning to legal practice?" "Terrified, grateful, determined to earn back the professional integrity I destroyed." I smiled, recognizing the daughter I'd raised before desperation and poor choices had corrupted her judgment. "Emily, can I ask you something that's been troubling me?" "Always, Dad." "Do you actually understand why what you did was wrong, or do you just understand that it caused negative consequences for you professionally?" Emily considered the question carefully, a habit she'd developed through months of therapy and ethical rehabilitation. 6 months ago, I would have said I understood because I got caught and faced punishment. Today, I understand that I was willing to destroy your autonomy and dignity to solve problems that weren't mine to solve using methods that violated everything I'd been taught about legal ethics. And if you were facing similar family financial pressure today, I'd ask for help honestly, accept whatever answer you gave, and find legal alternatives rather than creating victims to solve problems. She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "Dad, do you think you'll ever trust me completely again?" I considered the question with the same careful analysis I'd used for 40 years of medical decision-making. "Emily, I love you unconditionally. I trust you conditionally based on consistent ethical behavior over time. And I'm proud of the work you're doing to rebuild the integrity you destroyed. But will you ever trust me the way you did before?" "No, Emily. Because the person I trusted before was willing to forge medical records and commit elder abuse for money. I prefer the person you're becoming, someone who's learned that ethical principles aren't negotiable, even under extreme pressure." She nodded, accepting the honest assessment she'd learned to expect from our rebuilt relationship. "I can live with conditional trust based on demonstrated behavior." "Good, because sustainable relationships are built on earned respect rather than automatic forgiveness." As we finished dinner, Emily asked about my plans for the trust fund that had caused this entire crisis. "I'm restructuring everything," I said. "Creating educational scholarships for medical and law students studying professional ethics, establishing a foundation for elder abuse prevention and family financial literacy. Using the money David tried to steal to protect other families from the choices that destroyed ours." "That's perfect, Dad. It transforms something ugly into something meaningful." "Emily, recovery isn't about returning to who we were before the crisis. It's about becoming who we're supposed to be afterward, hopefully wiser, more ethical, and more honest about human nature. Before you go, drop your state in the comments below, because elder law varies dramatically across jurisdictions, and this story proves why understanding local legal protections matters when family relationships become financially complicated. And if this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to understand that family love requires ethical boundaries to remain healthy. Some lessons can only be learned through complete moral collapse followed by deliberate reconstruction. Some relationships can only be saved by nearly losing them entirely. And sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to enable their adult child's ethical destruction, even when that choice causes immediate pain for everyone involved. Recovery isn't just medical, it's moral. And moral recovery requires accepting that love without accountability isn't love at all.